I'm Dr. Ken Hanson, coordinator of the University of Central Florida Judaic Studies program. And I'm here today with my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Chaim Lipskier of UCF Chabad. And we're going to talk today about this really incredible organization, Chabad Lubavitch, which happens to be the largest organization of Hasidic Jews in the world today. We're going to talk about what Chabad is, how it began. We're going to talk about the role of Chabad as representative of Orthodox Jews in the American Jewish community and in the world, and we're going to go all the way back to the very beginnings of this movement in the 1700s in Poland. So we have quite a bit to talk about. I'm going to start by asking, how long have you been at UCF? What brought you here? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do on campus.
Okay, so we got to UCF in October of 2006, and we came here as representatives of the Chabad Lubavitch movement that has representatives all over the world. Since the 1950s, or even before that, the Chabad Rebbes started with the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch, and he immigrated to America in the 1940s during the war, and he made it his mission to really bring Judaism to every corner of the globe in a time when Judaism was being mocked, ridiculed, being chased down by anti-Semitism.
It's a very difficult time. We're talking about the Holocaust era.
Exactly. He made it his mission to kind of rebuild Judaism and bring Judaism to every corner of the world. In 1950, when the Lubavitch Rebbe took over, as we know, the Lubavitch Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson,
yes, who is number
7 in the Chabad dynasty. He made it his mission to really bring that message of Judaism to every corner of the globe, and started asking his followers, his Hasidim, to really enlist, so to speak, in this global army of bringing Judaism to every corner of the world, asking his followers to go different places and be representatives of the Chabad community, but beyond that, of the Chabad movement, but beyond that, be representative of Judaism in every corner of the globe. That grew over time. It took a slow start, but by the mid-'80s, many young couples getting married, followers of the Chabad movement, were very enthusiastic and excited to join this army of Chabad, so to speak, and enlist as servants in this of service to the Jewish world. And ever since I was a young kid, I wanted to be a part of this movement of what we call shlichim, emissaries, shluchim of the Rebbe. And as soon as I got the opportunity in 2006, 6 months after my wife and I got married, we seized the opportunity and found a location that didn't have a Chabad yet. And we found UCF, and became our home ever since.
How about that? You were really born into the movement, so to speak.
Yes. On my mom's side, we go back to the times of the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, back in Russia, in White Russia. And on my dad's side, a couple generations. But yes, I am, on both my mom and dad's side, we're Hasidim of the Chabad movement for generations.
So you just decided Florida, Orlando. Where were you coming from?
Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and so was my wife. And we got married in Brooklyn, and then we moved from Brooklyn to here. How do we choose UCF, you're asking? What made us, what attracted us to Florida?
Chabad already.
So I knew I wanted to be a Chabad representative on campus. There are different types of Chabad houses, if you will. We call each Chabad center a Chabad house. And there are community centers, there are learning centers, there are synagogues, there are Chabads that service the older community, the younger community, and then there's Chabad that services campus. I knew ever since I was about 18 or so that I wanted to work with college students. So when the opportunity came, I looked for a campus that had a large Jewish population that didn't have a Chabad yet.
It's a house and also a synagogue.
Right, so Chabad house really means everything. A Chabad house means a center for Chabad, a lighthouse, if you will, and every Chabad house will do anything that the community might need. So some Chabad houses might have services, like a synagogue. Some Chabad houses may not have services because there are local synagogues that are well attended, and that's not what the community needs. Every Chabad house will do different things. There are Chabad houses that do social service things, adult education. Depending on the community and what its needs are, the Chabad rabbi and rebbitzin, it's always staffed by a team, a couple, and many times they'll hire on other couples to assist. But every Chabad house does what the community needs, tries to really become a part of the community, integrated into the community, understand the needs of the community, and kind of serve as best it can to the needs of the community.
And the community here is our Jewish students. And it's really whatever is needed. You do everything. You have community outreach, you have barbecues, food, lots of food, and services as well, both Friday evening and on Shabbat, on Saturday.
Right. Well, that goes to the heart of what Chabad really is. Chabad isn't just, your spirituality we care about and everything else we don't. Chabad is kind of an integrated way of life. There is no separation between the physical and the spiritual. The physical is a manifestation of the spiritual, albeit obscured many times, not necessarily seen that way, but Chabad's mission is to show that the spiritual and the physical go hand in hand, and if you care about somebody, it's not just spiritually, it's a physical favor too. One of the Chabad teachings is doing a favor physically for somebody, helping somebody with a loan that needs a loan, helping somebody with a physical problem he has, schlepping boxes or whatever it may be that he needs physically is spirituality. There's no dichotomy, so to speak. Everything is really integrated. It's an integrated world, and therefore, if we care about people, we don't not just there for them when it comes to our synagogue services. We care about them for lunch too.
So you set up on the mall of the main campus, and you're just there for whatever Jewish students want to come by, chat, schmooze, and maybe to encourage them to perform some mitzvahs.
Exactly. We try to make ourselves as available as possible. We try to make it easy to get involved. We do lots of events at Chabad, but we try to be on campus as well. As you said, we set up a booth typically every Monday and Tuesday of the semester that says Chabad, or as we like to call ourselves over here, JUCF. And people stop by, and it's very relaxed. We a lot of times offer some snacks, a conversation, a way to get to know, and show people that we're approachable. We're not, it's a fun place to hang out and be, and just try to get them involved in the way they want.
Or encourage them to lay tefillin.
So encourage active mitzvah observance, yes. The way we look at things is that every single Jew, by definition, is connected to their Judaism. Every single person has a soul. That soul is connected to God. Sometimes we may not be aware of that connection. And to bring that connection to the surface, all you got to do is one small mitzvah, and then the soul gravitates to that. And as the Mishnah says, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to the next. When you encourage
Maschar ha-mitzvah, what is the reward of a mitzvah? Od mitzvah.
Right.
Another mitzvah.
Another mitzvah. Basically, once you taste it and you see its beauty, you want it for yourself. There's actually a rabbi that came to the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, we'll refer to him as the Rebbe because that's how the world knows him, the Rebbe, and said, he was lamenting the fact that American Jewry is very stubborn and it's very difficult to get anywhere with them. So the Rebbe said, you can't make an American Jew do anything, but you can teach an American Jew everything. Mm-hmm. So the idea isn't to coax or to force or to pressure. The idea is to give them the opportunity to ask questions, give them the opportunity to get involved. And once they want to learn, once they do one thing and they want to know, okay, this felt good, I feel connected, why? That by itself is kind of a snowball effect to make them want to be involved. And it's we don't really have a vision of we need every single person to look like X, Y, Z. We really just want to encourage each person to grow. And as long as you're growing, that's what matters.
And the message is very positive, isn't it? It's non-judgmental. It's a beckoning. Come on, let's encourage you.
100%.
But not to wag the finger at somebody else saying you're not doing this, you're not doing that. Very
right.
Positive.
It's a very positive experience. The emphasis is on joy. That goes back to the beginning of the birth of the Hasidic movement in general. But yeah, the emphasis is joy. The emphasis is on that we don't know the nature of souls. We don't know who's holier, who's better, who's not better. Action doesn't mean everything. Mean to say, just because someone looks very pious doesn't mean someone else that doesn't look as pious isn't really just as pious. We don't go by surface level externalities. We look at we value the soul. And on the level of soul, you never know who's a greater soul. So we try never to judge. And every person has their own journey. And someone that was born into tradition, into faith, their parents were doing this and their grandparents were doing it, may be very easy for them to have open display of Judaism and know what's going on. They know how to read Hebrew, they know how to wrap tefillin, they know what Passover is, they know what Rosh Hashanah is. You know, some other people never had that opportunity. They come from assimilated backgrounds where they never had the opportunity to learn. So because they don't know what Yom Kippur might be, doesn't tell you anything about the value of their soul. It just, they lack they didn't have the same opportunities as you did, and perhaps if they had your opportunities, they'd be better than you. So why judge?
And speaking of soul, let's explain what Chabad stands for. What is this acronym, Chabad? What does that mean?
So Chabad is actually an acronym, as you said. Chabad means Chachma, Bina, and Da'at. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And the concept basically is that your Judaism has to be thorough. It has to be intellectual, it has to be understood, but it can't just remain intellectual and aloof, because a lot of times people know things, but it never becomes integrated. Wisdom and understanding is good, but you really need to have knowledge. Knowledge is kind of that shift where that's a nice thing in theory to now this is integrated, this is a part of my life, this is who I am. And many people have a lot of things that they know, that they understand, that they can't comprehend, that even makes a lot of sense to them, but when you look at their life, they don't observe, they don't live what they believe. And Chabad is kind of trying to make it, you gotta understand, you gotta have depth and integrate. That's the most important thing, integration. If you don't have integration, you're missing everything. And to give it an illustration of that is the concept of, a lot of times you have a thief, right? You have a thief. And a thief is going to he's going to go steal something. He's going to break into somebody's house and take something, right? And that's forbidden, obviously, in any moral code of conduct. You don't steal from other people. But as they're about to break into a house, they offer up a silent prayer to God. They say, God, please don't let me get caught. Now, you think to yourself, if you believe in God, that you're praying to God, why are you stealing? God doesn't let you steal. But the reality is the person does believe in God, and they do steal because there is a disconnect, right? God has nothing to do with the way I make money, right? God is God, and I go to worship, and I believe in Him, and I have a relationship with Him on some level, and to the extent that I'm praying to Him and asking Him to make me successful at something He doesn't allow.
So if you believe in God, let's integrate.
Let's integrate it.
Maybe you won't want to steal at all.
Maybe. So the concept is that you need to contemplate and think about your relationship with God to the extent that it integrates into your life in a way that God now makes a difference in your decision-making process, not just I have my God, I have my life, and they don't really necessarily go hand in hand. You know, I leave God in synagogue or church, wherever it is, and when I go out, I'm a pious person in the place of worship, and in the street, I'm just rough and tumble like the street. But in the synagogue or place of worship, I play by God's rules. In the street, I play by street rules. Exactly. A business person, they may be very pious and praying in prayer, but then when it comes to make a deal, they'll hurt people in the process. There's a disconnect. Yeah. And Chabad really wants that to be integrated.
Out of the integration comes this joy that you mentioned. And I want to go all the way back to the beginning of the Hasidic movement, back to around 1700 in Poland, to this fellow by the name of Israel Ben Eliezer, who became known as the Baal Shem Tov or the Besht. Now, who was this fellow, and how did he come to lead this whole Hasidic movement?
So it's important to know that the word Baal Shem Tov was a name thrown around. He wasn't the only one with the name Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov means a master of a good name, and there were other scholars or saintly people named Baal Shem Tov, most notably Adam Baal Shem and others that became before the Baal Shem Tov. Essentially, someone that was a miracle worker became a master of a good name. People knew if they needed help, they'd come to the miracle worker, if you will. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement, and he came in a very unique time in Jewish history. It was just after the major pogroms, the Chmielnicki pogroms, and also just after the story of Shabtai Tzvi, with the false Messiah.
It was a horrific time.
It was a horrific, terrible time.
100,000 Jews slaughtered in Ukraine.
Right, and the Jewish...
in the 1600s. And then you also have this messianic pretender.
Right, and many Jews believed in it and followed him.
Even the majority of Jews worldwide believed that this fellow was the Mashiach, was the Messiah.
Right, until he converted.
When the whole thing fell apart, the Jewish people were in a state of utter despair.
And in general, Judaism was in a state of faint. Basically, people weren't excited, people weren't enthusiastic, people were very downtrodden. Almost like the Judaism, if you will, there's a person awake and alert, and then there's a person faint. They're there, but there's nothing going on. And the Jewish people were kind of in a place of faint. And beyond that, even within the Jewish community, it was very divisive. Scholars didn't mix with simple people. Scholars had their own synagogues. Simple people had their own synagogues. If you were ignorant, if you didn't know much, you were considered barely Jewish, not really part of things. And there was a big kind of from within and from without, and just the state of the Jewish people as a whole, from both within and without. It was just a time of great despair.
And we have Israel Ben Eliezer, who was one of these simple people. Unlearned, uneducated.
To the masses. He lived a double life. Meaning to say, in that time there was something called the group of the hidden tzaddikim. And there was a secret society of scholars that acted outwardly like peasants, like they didn't know anything, had regular jobs and pretended to be peasants, but at the same time were great scholars. And they made it their mission, actually, even before the Baal Shem Tov became the Baal Shem Tov, to travel around and uplift the spirit of the simple folk. They would go around and encourage simple people that weren't so connected, that their connection means a lot.
And infuse them with joy.
With joy in their service of God.
Period.
Now, the Baal Shem Tov kind of outed himself to the world, if you will, started acting like a scholar and being a teacher and a scholar at a certain age, right? And basically his goal was to bridge this gap, to bring new vitality into the Jewish community, to bring new excitement and passion to the Jewish people, and also to break the divisiveness within the Jewish community. Actually, interestingly, his name is Yisrael. The Jewish people are called B'nai Yisrael. One of the ancient methods of taking somebody out of faint is whispering their name in their ear, or saying their name. Kind of when you say their name, it kind of brings them back to the surface. Like you call them, kind of brings them out of their state of faint. And essentially, his name was Yisrael because he was kind of a whisper to bring the Jewish people out of a state of faint. And he started tearing down these divisiveness, the divisiveness within the Jewish community, teaching that scholarship isn't everything, and how sometimes God could be found in the joy and the simplicity of a simple person's relationship to God, much greater than in the cold intellect of a scholar.
So you have these Hasidic gatherings, Hasidic synagogues, that really crystallized during this period, much of which is due to the efforts of the Baal Shem Tov,
right.
the Vesh. And there was such a sense, talk about joy, of just jubilation, that as opposed to just a standard Shabbat service, for example, on a Friday evening, there'd be a Hasidic, almost Kabbalistic concept that we're entering now into a union with the Sabbath bride. And let's display this. Let's get up and let's dance.
Right.
And whirling tzaddikim, dancing around on
Well,
Friday night.
In the Torah itself, even the 5 books of Moses, it says that you need to serve God with joy. This is not an innovation of the Hasidic movement. This is many things. It says, Tachat asher lo avadat Hashem b'simcha. When God's giving the rebuke, Moses is giving the rebuke, Moses says the reason why some of the rebuke comes is because you don't serve God with joy. Joy was always a great emphasis, but always never taken so seriously. What the Baal Shem Tov came and did and said is that we need to celebrate our relationship with God. Our relationship with God isn't just an intellectual one, it's something we need to feel in our heart. It's also important to remember that most of the Baal Shem Tov students were the greatest scholars of the time. That means even though he was teaching that the simple folk have a lot, it wasn't like he was saying intellectual learning and focus on study isn't important. People tried to pin him that way, that he was saying study isn't important, isn't valued, really just emotion and joy is valued. He himself and his closest students were the greatest scholars of the time. Even when it comes to halachic Judaism and Talmudic Judaism, they wrote the books that most of us use to discern Jewish law today.
But he was terribly misunderstood, and there grew to be a serious movement against Hasidism.
Right.
Really, right in the center of world Jewry at the time, which was the Polish Jewish community.
Right.
One great scholar in particular, the Vilna Gaon, as he was known, thought this was really a scandal. This whole concept of dancing around and all this emotional display. So we have this term known as the Nagdim, which is actually an important term in Jewish history. These are the opponents, the Nagdim. The word means opponents, those who opposed the Hasidic movement.
Right. Especially, most importantly, and if you read their early letters and writing about the Hasidic movement, most importantly because they felt that the Baal Shem Tov was tearing down the structure of Judaism. That they thrived on the honor that the simple give the scholars. And if we start focusing that the scholars are no better than the simple, then how does that social hierarchy work? It was kind of a social revolution. How do we, as scholars, retain control over Judaism, meaning to say, make sure that people are following Judaism the right way if we're not going to put any emphasis on scholarship, or we're going to tear away the emphasis from scholarship, which was a misunderstanding because Baal Shem Tov, as we know, and as I just said a moment ago, and as we go to the Maggid of Mezrich, the disciple and successor of the Baal Shem Tov, they mostly attracted the greatest scholars of the time. So it wasn't, they were kind of misunderstood, as you said before, where they were trying to breathe new life into the simple folk, not trying to tear down the value of Jewish learning, but sometimes people feel when you elevate one, you're tearing down the other. And it wasn't really what he was trying to do. He was trying to elevate the one without tearing down the other and just showing the value of a simple person. There is so much beauty in how a simple-minded person prays to God, where God is more real than the greatest scholar. Actually, there's different discussions of what you should be thinking, what kind of kavanah, what kind of meditation experiences you should be thinking about when you're praying. It's not just about reading words, it's about a connection, right? That's what prayer really means, it's connecting. So there's different discussions, and one of the great scholars said, I pray with the simplicity of a simple child. When a simple child asks God, give me something, he really believes that God is listening and is going to give him that. How many adults can say they actually believe that with sincerity?
I love the story of the poor man lost in the woods, and it's time to pray, and he realizes he's forgotten his prayer book. And what is he going to do? So he says, God, Hashem, it's time to pray. I've forgotten my prayer book. What shall I do? I'll just recite the letters of the alphabet, and you put them together in the right way. And we're told that God heard that prayer more than all of the others recited on that day.
Exactly, because if in that prayer, in that moment, the seriousness and the closeness he felt to God, and he wasn't just mimicking words and being silly and saying something that he didn't believe. In his heart of hearts, he believed that God can rearrange all these letters into all the prayers, and God can understand what he wants and needs in a very deep way. So if we can tap that simplicity, then that's a real relationship that sometimes scholars can't even achieve. They get lost in thought and in the sophistication that sometimes you miss the subtle and the beauty. And that's what he was trying to bring out. Not that scholarship is a waste of time, God forbid. On the contrary, every Hasidic movement puts great emphasis on scholarship. But beyond the scholarship, there is something you need to be working on in your heart. Not that the scholar shouldn't be a scholar, but even if you're a scholar, you got to connect to your heart. You got to be able to have a real relationship, not just of words and thought, but actually to really bring that into your heart and have a simple, become simple in a certain sense.
And I love the story about the wedding feast going on, and everyone is having a wonderful time and dancing round and round, but a deaf man, a man who has no hearing, walks by outside, and he looks in and he says, "These people are crazy," because he could not hear the music to which all the others were dancing.
Exactly. And over time, it would prove that what the Nagdim were worried about was baseless. It wasn't what they misread what was going on.
So that the rift healed.
The rift healed, yes.
Because even the Nagdim understood that there is serious and really great scholarship among
100%. And beyond that, today there is no walk of mainstream Judaism, if you will, that isn't influenced by Hasidic ideas, values, and culture. And it really entered every area of life.
So Chabad today reaches out to other Jewish movements, has good relations with other Jewish movements in the United States. It tries not to be insular, but to be a part and a vital part of the entire Jewish expression.
Of every community it can be a part of. And the Baal Shem, so this was a general thing for the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. Then it turned, how did Chabad come from the Hasidic movement? Chabad is a movement within the Hasidic movement. Chabad became where others stayed focused on the joy and the connection to a holy man, the connection to a Rebbe. The leader of a Hasidic movement is called a Rebbe, and the followers are called Hasidim. Where in most Hasidic movements, the Rebbe was the thinker, the philosopher, the one who delved deeply into Hasidic thought and literature and did the actual learning and scholarship, and the others kind of fed off his scholarship. That was most of the Hasidic movement. The Alter Rebbe said, what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching is integration. And I can't just be the leader and everybody else just follows me. I got to teach them how to build this integration, otherwise it's not what the Baal Shem Tov really wanted. And that's when it became an emphasis of Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, integrate. And he started teaching much more Hasidic philosophy, which sometimes people call Kabbalah because lack of a good word, but Hasidic philosophy is different and many times deeper than the Kabbalah. It's just given it in a rational way for a typical rational mind to be able to wrap their heads around, instead of being very Kabbalistic in the sense where it's aloof and hard to understand, written kind of in smoke, like with a smoke screen over it. So if you can't, sometimes too difficult to decipher what the Kabbalist is trying to say, unless you're a great scholar. Chabad tries to spell it out in a rational way that any student that wants to pick it up can pick it up and learn. This proved very, very important and very, very integral later on with the Enlightenment movement and the revolutions in Russia and other places where vast amounts of Jewish people were running away from Judaism for the social revolutions, for the intellectual, for the modern, modernity. And most of the yeshivas, even the Orthodox, were decimated because they got very into the other, the world was preaching freedom and equality and was very compelling. And there was lots of great worldly scholars that really pulled at the people. And the one movement that managed to stay strong through it all and wasn't really obliterated by that was the Chabad movement. And interestingly, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch, he started a Chabad yeshiva where, or a religious school, if you will, that would teach these things. And many people from throughout all of that area, from, I guess, what you would call the former Soviet Union now, right? That whole region, Eastern Europe and stuff, would send students, even kids that weren't from Chabad backgrounds, would come to the yeshiva because they knew this is a place where they'll get the knowledge and the know-how to keep their Judaism strong in the face of all obstacles.
Knowledge and know-how. That's what it was then. That's what it remains today. I thank you so much. We could talk for hours. I'm sure we'll have occasion in the future to do so. But
God willing.
This is a wonderful snapshot of what Chabad is, what the Jewish community has experienced via this incredible movement, how it began. So much more to think about, to wrap our limited understanding about, but above all, to integrate. Thank you so much for being here, and we will talk again.
A pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me. I can't wait for next time.